Welcome, today's story is full of drama. Like and subscribe to stay updated. Let's get started.
Growing up, my father, Jonathan Brooks, was more than just a distant memory or a face in old photographs. He was a hero. Everyone told me that, and for a long time that word hero was just that, a word, something abstract, almost mythical. But as I got older and learned the truth about what he did, that word became heavier, more meaningful, and at the same time harder to carry. Dad was a ranger, not just any soldier, but the kind of man who led others into the worst situations imaginable and somehow managed to get most of them out alive. Operation Arid Thunder was his battlefield. A war that might as well have been a world away when I was too young to understand what war even meant. The story was told to me in pieces over the years, each fragment forming a larger picture of who he was. His squad was pinned down, caught in a firefight so intense it felt like the entire desert was raining fire and metal. The Eastern Coalition forces had them in a chokehold, and survival seemed impossible. That's when Dad, as their leader, called for an evacuation. He had made a promise to his men, a promise that no one would be left behind, and he was determined to keep it. When the chopper arrived, chaos erupted. Smoke filled the air, gunfire rang out in deafening bursts, and sand whipped around like a storm of its own. One by one, he moved his men onto that helicopter, barking orders and shielding them as best he could. I can only imagine the scene, his voice steady, his movements deliberate, even as bullets bit into the air around him. They told me that once the last man was on board, he had a choice. He could have climbed into that chopper, flown away to safety with his team, and lived to fight another day. But instead, he turned back. There were reports of fire coming from a nearby position, and he knew that if the chopper lifted off with him on board, it could be brought down. He went back to secure the area, to make sure his team would make it out alive. He didn't make it back. They found his body 4 hours later. 4 hours of searching through the wreckage and dust. 4 hours of hoping against hope that he might still be alive. But he was gone. When I think about those 4 hours, I feel the strange mix of pride and pain. I've had people tell me that what he did was selfless, brave, even legendary, and I know they're right. But sometimes, when the nights get quiet, I let myself feel selfish. I let myself wonder what it would have been like if he had just gotten on that chopper. If he had come home. If he had been there to teach me how to throw a ball or tie a tie. Or tell me about the day he met Mom. But then I think about the men he saved, the families who still have their fathers, sons, brothers because of what Dad did. And I realize that his sacrifice wasn't just for his squad. It was for their children too, for people like me. Sometimes I visit his grave and sit there, imagining what I would say if he were standing in front of me. I tell him that I miss him, of course. But more than that, I tell him that I'm proud to be his son. Proud to carry his name and his legacy. People always say that family is about blood. But for me, it's about love and sacrifice. My father, Jonathan Brooks, showed me that with the ultimate act of heroism, laying down his life for his men during Operation Arid Thunder. One of those men was Logan Hart, my father's second in command. Logan not only owed my father his life but also gave his life to us, becoming a father to me when I needed one the most. I was too young to truly understand what had happened when my father died. For a long time, it felt like this gaping hole in my life, something I couldn't quite explain but always felt. My mom, strong as she was, had her own struggles dealing with the loss. That's when Logan stepped in. He didn't do it out of obligation. He did it because he genuinely cared for my father, for my mom, and for me. Logan married my mom when I was around 6 years old, and from the very beginning, he treated me as if I were his own flesh and blood. I'll never forget the day he sat me down and asked if I would take his name. He didn't pressure me, he said it was my choice. But the way he looked at me, with so much pride, love, and patience, it wasn't a hard decision. I became Ethan Hart, not to replace my father's name, but to honor the man who chose to be there for me every single day. Logan never had kids of his own, and I know now it was deliberate. He wanted to give me everything. He had his time, his attention, his love. He showed me how to throw a football, helped me with my homework, and stood in the bleachers at every game, cheering me on like I was the greatest kid alive. He was the kind of man you could count on for anything, the kind who fixed broken toys as easily as he fixed broken hearts. As I got older, I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps and become a ranger. I thought about Logan a lot during my training. He never discouraged me, even though I knew it scared him. He supported me the way he always had, reminding me to be my best and to carry my father's memory with pride. Becoming a ranger was everything I dreamed of, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. A fast roping accident during a training exercise left me with a busted knee and a medical discharge. It felt like my world crumbled. Everything I'd worked for, everything I wanted to be, was suddenly out of reach. I came back home feeling like a failure. But Logan was there, as he always was, ready to catch me when I fell. By then, he had started his own construction business after retiring from the military. He didn't let me wallow in my self-pity for long. "Life's about adapting, son," he told me. "Your dad was a hero because he adapted in the toughest situations. You can do the same." I joined his business, and while it wasn't the life I'd imagined, it became one I was proud of. Logan taught me everything he knew about the trade. He made me feel like I wasn't just his son. I was his partner. Together, we built more than buildings. We built a legacy that I still remember the day I met Sophia Carter, like it happened yesterday. It was at a convention in Austin, a sprawling event buzzing with energy and packed with people from all over the country. I wasn't expecting anything extraordinary that day. I was there more out of obligation than excitement. But then I saw her. She stood out in the crowd like a beacon, beautiful, elegant, and carrying herself with a quiet confidence that made it impossible to look away. Her smile could light up a room, and for some reason, it felt like she looked right through the noise and chaos to where I stood. My heart raced, and for a moment, I debated whether to approach her or let the opportunity slip by. I wasn't exactly the smoothest guy when it came to women. The idea of walking up to someone like Sophia was intimidating. But then a thought struck me: what do I have to lose? Worst case, she says no, and I go on with my life. Best case, well, I didn't dare dream that far yet. I gathered my courage, walked over, and introduced myself. To my surprise and relief, she didn't brush me off. She was warm and easy to talk to, and before I even realized it, we were laughing and chatting like old friends. When I asked if she'd like to have dinner with me, I was holding my breath, and then she said yes. That first date was like magic. We talked for hours, sharing stories, laughing, and discovering how much we had in common. Sophia had this way of making everything around her seem brighter. Before I knew it, one date turned into another, then another. Over the next 3 years, our relationship grew. Sophia wasn't just beautiful. She was smart, kind, and had a way of grounding me when life felt overwhelming. She became my rock, my partner, and my best friend. She accepted every part of me, my past, my flaws, and my dreams, and made me feel like I could conquer anything as long as she was by my side. When I proposed, it wasn't some grand gesture or elaborate setup. It was just the two of us, in a quiet moment that felt right. I looked into her eyes and told her I couldn't imagine my life without her. Thankfully, she said yes. Our wedding was small but perfect. As I stood there watching her walk down the aisle, I couldn't believe how lucky I was. Running a construction business isn't just about building structures. It's about keeping them standing, making sure every beam and every nail has my name and reputation behind it. Expanding to more cities in Texas was a huge step, and I poured everything into it. Time, effort, and long hours on the road. It was exciting, but it came with sacrifices. Carrying my Glock has always been more about precaution than anything else. When you're visiting construction sites, some in less than ideal neighborhoods, you can't take chances. It's become as much a part of my routine as putting on my hard hat. But as much as I thought about safety on site, I started to realize there was something more dangerous brewing at home. It's been 2 years since Sophia and I got married, and things were perfect at first. She was my everything, my partner, my confidant, the person who made all the hard work worth it. But lately, it feels like I'm losing her. I know my schedule hasn't been easy on her. I'm gone a lot, sometimes for days, traveling from one site to another. I offered to take her with me, thinking it might give us some time together, a chance to bridge the growing distance. But she turned me down. She said it wasn't her kind of thing, that she'd rather stay home and let me focus on the business. I didn't push it, thinking I was respecting her space. But now I'm starting to wonder if I should have. The past 5 months have been the hardest. We haven't been intimate, not once. Sophia has been distant, preoccupied. She's on her phone constantly, chatting with someone. Whenever I ask about it, she brushes it off, saying it's just friends or family. But something doesn't feel right. Last week, I decided I couldn't let this fester any longer. I sat Sophia down and told her how I was feeling, how worried I was about the space growing between us. I asked her if something was wrong, something I could fix. But instead of opening up, she dismissed my concerns. She told me I was imagining things and should focus on growing the business, that this was just a phase and we'd be fine. I wanted to believe her, to take her at her word. But there's this nagging feeling I can't shake. I've built my life on trusting my instincts, and right now, they're screaming that something is off. I don't want to doubt Sophia. She's my wife, the woman I love, but I can't ignore what's in front of me. For now, I'll keep doing what I do best, working hard, building something solid. But the question is, can I rebuild what we've started to lose? Or is it already too late? The signs were small at first, almost easy to brush off as my imagination running wild. But they started adding up, and each one felt like a punch to the gut. I'd smell cologne on her clothes while doing laundry, something I knew wasn't mine. Sophia started locking her phone, something she'd never done before. And her girls' nights out seemed to multiply. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was being paranoid because of how distant we'd become. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something was wrong. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. His name was Jack Hayes. The name alone sounded like it belonged to a hard-nosed detective from an old crime novel. He was a former cop who traded in his badge for a career digging into people's secrets. When I walked into his office, I wasn't sure what to expect. But the man who greeted me looked the part. Late 40s, salt and pepper hair, a firm handshake. He had the kind of eyes that seemed to see right through you. We sat down in his small, cluttered office. The walls were lined with case files, and a faint smell of stale coffee lingered in the air. "So, Mr. Hart," he started, leaning back in his chair and studying me. "What brings you here today?" I hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "It's my wife," I said, my voice low. I think she might be seeing someone else." Jack didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He just nodded, as if he'd heard the same thing 100 times before. "Tell me what's got you thinking that." I laid it all out for him. The distant behavior, the locked phone, the sudden increase in nights out, and the cologne on her clothes. He listened quietly, jotting down notes in a small leather notebook. "And you've confronted her about this?" he asked. "I have," I admitted, but she brushed it off, told me I was imagining things and to focus on work. He tapped his pen against the notebook, thinking, "That's not unusual. If there's something going on, people rarely admit it outright. Too much at stake. But you're here because you need proof, right?" I nodded. "I need to know, one way or the other." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Here's how this works. I'll follow her, see where she goes, who she meets. I'll take photos, gather evidence, and report back to you. But I have to warn you, Mr. Hart. Sometimes the answers you get aren't the ones you want. Are you prepared for that?" I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "I just want the truth," I said. "Fair enough." He scribbled something down and slid a contract across the desk. "Here's my rate and terms. It's not cheap, but you'll get results. Sign here, and we'll get started." I looked over the paperwork, my hands trembling slightly. The price was steep, but I didn't care. Peace of mind, one way or the other, was worth it. I signed and handed the contract back to him, along with an envelope of cash. Jack took the envelope, counted it quickly, and nodded. "I'll start tomorrow. You'll hear from me as soon as I have something." I stood to leave, and he extended his hand. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Mr. Hart. You can count on that." I shook his hand, trying to keep my composure as I walked out of his office. A part of me hoped that all of this was just a big misunderstanding. But another part of me wasn't so sure. The next 2 weeks after hiring Jack Hayes felt like an eternity. Sophia and I drifted further apart, with no intimacy and hardly any real conversation. She stayed glued to her phone, her locked screen a silent reminder of the distance between us. Every night felt colder, lonelier. I threw myself into work, trying to keep my mind occupied, but the doubt gnawed at me constantly. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed. It was Jack. "Mr. Hart." His voice was steady and professional. "I need you to come to my office. I have something to show you." My stomach churned. I didn't ask for details. I just said I'd be there. When I arrived, Jack was sitting behind his desk, a glass of whiskey in hand, another glass waiting for me. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing toward the chair in front of his desk. I sat down, the weight of the moment settling over me. He slid the glass toward me, and I took a sip, the burn of the whiskey doing little to ease my nerves. "Ethan," he started, his tone more solemn than before. "What I'm about to show you isn't easy to see. Are you ready for this?" I nodded, jaw tightening. "Just show me." Jack turned his laptop toward the large monitor on the wall and connected it. Images and videos began popping up on the screen. The first was a still shot. Sophia in a parking lot, her arms wrapped around a man I recognized immediately, Derek Langston, a contractor I'd worked with briefly on a project in San Antonio. Known for his cocky demeanor and questionable ethics, he was the last person I ever thought would cross paths with my wife. Jack clicked through more evidence. Videos of Sophia and Derek entering a motel. Another of them laughing together at a bar, their body language intimate. And finally, the one that made my stomach twist into knots. A grainy video of them in the motel room, kissing, undressing, and going further than I could bear to watch. My vision blurred as rage bubbled up inside me. Hot, uncontrollable. For a moment, I wanted to smash the monitor, throw the laptop across the room, anything to erase what I'd just seen. But I gripped the edge of the desk, forcing myself to breathe slowly, to push the rage down enough to speak. "Send me everything," I said, my voice low and trembling. Jack nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll compile it all and send it to you tonight. Photos, videos, timestamps, the works. Whatever you need." I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, the images seared into my mind. Finally, I looked at Jack. "Anything else I need to know?" Jack leaned back in his chair. "Derek isn't keeping this discreet. A couple of the places they've been seen aren't exactly out of the way. They're taking risks, Ethan. And frankly, it doesn't seem like she's trying very hard to hide this from anyone but you." The weight of his words sank in. "Thanks, Jack. I'll take it from here." He watched me carefully. "Ethan, whatever you're thinking of doing, think it through. Don't let anger control you. If you need anything, legal advice, more intel, you know how to reach me." I nodded, stood up, shook his hand, and walked out of the office. The cold night air hit me like a slap to the face. I climbed into my truck, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The rage was still there, simmering just below the surface. But so was something else, determination. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't bring myself to face Sophia, not after what I'd seen. Instead, I drove aimlessly for hours, letting the silence of the night and the hum of the engine keep me company. I thought about the woman I met in Austin, the one who captivated me with her elegance and charm. I thought about our early days together, the laughter, the late-night talks, the promises we made to each other. Those memories felt like they belonged to a different lifetime, a different person. When I finally pulled into a motel parking lot, it was past midnight. I paid for a room in cash, not wanting to leave a trace of where I was. The room was small, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke. It didn't matter. I wasn't planning to sleep anyway. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring, for Sophia to call and ask where I was, or if I was okay. But the phone stayed silent. No missed calls, no texts, nothing. It hit me then she didn't care. Not enough to wonder why I hadn't come home. Not enough to check if I was alive or dead. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was indifference. That realization was like a knife twisting in my chest. By the time the sun rose, the love I once had for Sophia was gone. Whatever warmth, whatever affection I'd felt for her, it had all been burned away by her actions and her silence. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this, like a one-sided battle where one person fights while the other walks away. I'd given her everything I had, and in return, she'd given herself to someone else. Sitting in that motel room, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her continue to disrespect me or our marriage. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure: Sophia had killed the love I had for her, and there was no bringing it back. The sun was dipping below the horizon as I pulled into the driveway of our home. My stomach churned with dread. The house was unusually dark, every window devoid of the soft glow of light Sophia usually left on. Something felt off, wrong in a way I couldn't shake. I parked the truck and sat for a moment, my Glock resting in its holster on my hip. My instincts, honed from years of training, told me to stay alert. Slowly, I got out and approached the house, each step deliberate. The moment I opened the door, the silence hit me like a wall. No television, no faint hum of music, No familiar sounds of Sophia moving about, just silence. Then, faint footsteps upstairs. I froze, my heart pounding, and my hand instinctively went to my Glock. I drew it, flipping the safety off with a practiced motion, and crept further inside. My boots barely made a sound on the hardwood floor as I scanned every corner, every shadow. Then I saw it, a dim silhouette moving near the bedroom. My voice came out steady, commanding, a tone I had used countless times in the field. "Step out where I can see you now." There was hesitation, then the figure darted toward me, fast and reckless. My training kicked in before I could think. My finger squeezed the trigger once, twice, 3 times. The sound of gunfire exploded in the small space, each shot echoing in my ears. The figure crumpled to the floor, groaning weakly before going still. I moved cautiously toward the body, Glock still drawn. My hands were steady as I crouched down and checked for a pulse. There was none. My stomach churned as I realized I had just taken a life. Reaching for my phone, I dialed 911, my voice calm but urgent as I explained what had happened. I placed the pistol on the table, barrel facing away, and waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. I paced the living room, forcing myself to stay composed, to think about what I would say. The sound of sirens broke the silence, followed by the flash of red and blue lights through the windows. The front door burst open, and officers flooded in, their guns drawn. "Hands up!" one of them shouted. I raised my hands, not resisting as they closed the distance and cuffed me. The cold metal bit into my wrists as they led me toward the couch. Then I heard it, a sound that made my blood freeze. Sophia's sobbing voice. She emerged from the hallway, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling. "What have you done?" she cried, her voice breaking. You killed Adam." The name didn't register. I stared at her, my thoughts a jumbled mess of confusion and rage. "Who the hell is Adam?" I demanded, my voice low and cold. Sophia didn't answer. She just shook her head, tears streaming down her face, her hands covering her mouth as she looked at the lifeless body on the floor. One of the officers grabbed my arm. "You're coming with us," he said, leading me out the door. As they escorted me to the squad car, I glanced back at Sophia, still crying hysterically, and at the man lying on the floor. My mind was spinning, trying to connect the dots. I didn't know who Adam was, but judging by Sophia's reaction, he was someone she cared about. A lot. Sitting in the holding cell at the station, I felt like the walls were closing in. My thoughts raced, fragmented, jumping from Sophia's betrayal to the man I had just shot, to the terrifying realization that my life was unraveling. When I finally got my one phone call, there was only one person I trusted enough to contact Logan. He arrived quickly, bringing with him Catherine Daniels, a no-nonsense lawyer known for her ruthless efficiency. Catherine walked into the interrogation room where I sat, her tailored suit and piercing gaze making the cramped space feel even smaller. "Ethan," she said firmly, "from this point on, you don't say a word unless I'm present." "Understood." I nodded, too overwhelmed to argue. The police wasted no time. They laid out the charge: manslaughter. When Catherine relayed the accusation, it hit me like a sledgehammer. "Manslaughter," I repeated, my voice cracking. I was protecting my home. There was an intruder. What was I supposed to do? Let him rush me. Catherine held up a hand, silencing me. "I know, Ethan," she said calmly, her voice steady, "but the DA is moving fast. They're building a case against you because of the circumstances. Someone you supposedly knew, unarmed, in your house. It looks bad. We'll fight it." I clenched my fists, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I didn't even know the guy's name, let alone why he was in my house. Nothing makes sense. The next day, I was granted bail, but Catherine had more bad news waiting for me as we left the station. "You can't go home," she said bluntly. "What do you mean, I can't go home?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "Sophia's filed a restraining order against you," she explained, her expression unreadable. "You're legally barred from going near her or the house. On top of that, she's filed for divorce." Her words hit me like a freight train. "Divorce? Already? Are you kidding me?" Catherine shook her head. "She's moving fast. Too fast, if you ask me. There's something off about all of this, Ethan." As Logan drove me back to his place, my mind kept circling the same questions. Why was Sophia acting so quickly? What was she hiding? And most importantly, who the hell was Adam? The courtroom was silent except for the sound of my breathing, each inhale feeling like it might be my last. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat in the defendant's chair, my hands clenched into fists. I had already pled not guilty, and now I was staring down the barrel of a trial that could destroy everything I had left. Catherine Daniels sat next to me, calm and composed, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She'd already spoken to Jack Hayes, who had been digging deeper into Sophia's betrayal, but none of that mattered right now. What mattered was what the jury believed. The prosecutor stood, addressing the jury with dramatic flair. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice confident and accusatory, "this is not just a case of self-defense gone wrong. This is a case of cold-blooded rage. A man consumed by jealousy who took another man's life." He gestured toward me with a theatrical flourish. Ethan Hart knew Adam Lane was in his home. He brought his weapon with the intent to kill. He was not defending himself. He was seeking vengeance. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I wanted to stand up and shout, to tell them that wasn't what happened. But Catherine's hand rested on my arm, a silent reminder to stay composed. The prosecutor's voice droned on, painting a picture of me as a jealous, vengeful husband. It felt like the truth didn't matter anymore, only the story they were spinning. When the prosecutor finally sat down, Catherine rose. Her presence was commanding, her tone measured and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "what we have here is not a case of jealousy or rage. It is a case of a man protecting his home. Ethan Hart came home to a dark house, saw a figure rushing toward him, and acted as any reasonable person would when fearing for their life." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "The prosecution wants you to believe this was premeditated. But where is the evidence? Where are the messages, the witnesses, the proof of intent? They don't exist, because this never happened." Catherine stepped closer to the jury, her voice softening but losing none of its strength. Ethan Hart was not acting out of jealousy. He was acting out of instinct and fear. This was not murder, it was self-defense. Her words were clear, logical, and powerful, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. As the trial progressed, Catherine methodically dismantled the prosecution's case. She called Jack Hayes to the stand, who presented the timeline of Sophia's activities leading up to that night. Using phone records, surveillance footage, and text logs, he painted a damning picture of a coordinated plot. Sophia Carter was in contact with both Derek Langston and Adam Lane on the evening of the incident, Jack testified. The timeline shows she orchestrated events to ensure Mr. Lane was in the house when Mr. Hart returned home. He pulled up a series of messages between Sophia and Derek. The texts were explicit, not just about their affair, but about their plan to provoke me into an act of violence. Catherine leaned in. "In your professional opinion, Mr. Hayes, what was the intent of this plot?" Jack didn't hesitate. It was entrapment. They wanted Mr. Hart to act impulsively, to create a scenario where he'd be accused of a crime. This wasn't self-defense gone wrong, it was a setup. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, and I saw Sophia's face pale. For the first time, her confident demeanor cracked. Derek, seated in the gallery, shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance evaporating. The final blow came when Catherine cross-examined Sophia. "Mrs. Carter," Catherine began, her voice sharp and precise. "You claim to have been upstairs during the shooting, correct?" Sophia nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, I was in the bedroom." Catherine paced slowly. "And you didn't hear any commotion downstairs? No voices? No sounds that might have alerted you to what was happening?" I heard a noise," Sophia stammered. "But I didn't know what it was." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "So, you were unaware of Adam Lane's presence in the living room? Despite the fact that surveillance footage shows you escorting him into the house less than 20 minutes before Mr. Hart arrived." Sophia's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Mrs. Carter," Catherine continued, her tone growing colder, "why were the lights off in the living room when Mr. Hart entered the house? Did you not think it would be dangerous for an intruder to wait in the dark?" Sophia hesitated. I don't know. Maybe Adam turned them off." Catherine smirked, turning to the jury. "Convenient, but not plausible. We've already established that the lights were off when Mr. Hart arrived, because someone wanted him to react in fear." She turned back to Sophia, her voice biting. "And that someone was you." Sophia broke then, her composure shattering as tears streamed down her face. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," she cried. "Derek said it would just scare him, that it would make him look bad in court. I didn't know Adam would." Her voice trailed off, and the courtroom erupted in whispers. Catherine silenced them with a single motion, her expression triumphant. "No further questions, Your Honor." The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. When they returned, my heart pounded as the foreperson read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Ethan Hart, not guilty." Relief washed over me, so overwhelming I thought I might collapse. Catherine placed a hand on my shoulder, a rare smile breaking through her stern demeanor. But the judge wasn't done. He turned to Sophia and Derek, his voice cold and authoritative. "This case has uncovered disturbing evidence of conspiracy and entrapment. I am ordering an immediate investigation into the actions of Sophia Carter and Derek Langston. They will face justice for their roles in this plot." As the courtroom erupted in chaos, I sat back, finally able to breathe. The nightmare was over, but my life would never be the same. Sophia and Derek had tried to destroy me, but they had failed. Now it was my turn to rebuild. The days following the trial were a blur. Though I was cleared of all charges, the weight of everything that had happened lingered like a storm cloud. My name was cleared, but my marriage, my trust, and my sense of security had been shattered. Sophia and Derek's actions had left scars that would take years to heal. Catherine was quick to act after the trial. She had already begun assisting the authorities with the investigation into Sophia and Derek. Their conspiracy was unraveling rapidly, and it was only a matter of time before they faced their own day in court. 2 weeks after the verdict, I got a call from Catherine. "Ethan," she said, her voice firm and steady, "the DA's office has officially charged Sophia and Derek with conspiracy, attempted entrapment, and obstruction of justice. They've also uncovered new evidence that could lead to additional charges." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "What kind of evidence?" "There are financial records," Catherine explained. "Derek and Sophia were planning to drain your accounts and take advantage of the divorce proceedings to gain access to your business assets. The affair wasn't just personal, it was calculated. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought it could. It wasn't just my love and trust Sophia had betrayed. It was my livelihood, my future." Catherine's voice softened. "I know this is a lot to take in, but you need to focus on what's next. This chapter is closing, and it's time to move forward." The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. Thanks to Catherine's meticulous preparation, I retained full control of my business and assets. The prenuptial agreement Sophia and Derek had tried so hard to circumvent held firm. Their scheme had failed in every possible way. Sophia, now facing serious criminal charges, had no choice but to accept the terms. Catherine served the final papers directly to her attorney, who delivered them to her in jail. I didn't need to see her or hear from her. The silence was closure enough. As for Derek, his arrogance had turned to desperation. Reports surfaced that he had tried to negotiate a deal with the authorities, offering information about Sophia in exchange for leniency. But it was too late. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his betrayal of Sophia only sealed his fate. Both were convicted of conspiracy and fraud, with additional charges pending. Their sentences were long, ensuring they wouldn't hurt anyone else again. The months that followed were a mix of rebuilding and rediscovery. I threw myself into the business, expanding into new markets and focusing on the work that had always grounded me. Logan was by my side, as he had been through every storm in my life. His quiet strength and unwavering support reminded me that family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty and love. One day, as we finished a project together, Logan put a hand on my shoulder. "You've been through hell, Ethan, but you've come out stronger. Don't let this define you. You've got a life to live, and it's a good one." His words stayed with me. I began to focus on the future, on what I wanted to build, not just in business but in my personal life. I reconnected with old friends, traveled to places I'd always wanted to see, and started to find joy in the small, simple moments again. It was nearly a year later when I met someone new, Lauren Blake. She was smart, driven, and unflinchingly honest. There was no pretense with her, no games. Our connection grew slowly, built on trust and mutual respect. She knew about my past, about Sophia and everything that had happened, but she never judged me for it. Instead, She saw the person I was trying to become. One evening, as we sat on a patio overlooking the city, she looked at me and said, "You've been through more than most people could handle, but you're still here. That says something." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again, like I could truly move forward. Sophia and Derek's betrayal had been a crucible, a painful, transformative experience that forced me to confront who I was and who I wanted to be. Their actions didn't break me. They revealed my strength, my resilience, and my capacity to rebuild. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine to shape. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to embrace it. Months passed, and life gradually settled into a new rhythm. With Sophia and Derek both serving lengthy prison sentences, their shadows no longer loomed over my life. My focus shifted entirely to rebuilding, not just my business but myself. The construction company expanded into new cities across Texas, and for the first time, I felt a sense of pride that wasn't tainted by the turmoil of the past. Lauren and I grew closer during this time. She had a way of grounding me, of reminding me that the past didn't have to define my future. One evening, over dinner, I opened up to her in a way I hadn't with anyone else. "I used to think I had it all figured out," I admitted, swirling the last of my drink in its glass. "A career, a wife, a life I thought was solid. But it was all a lie." Sophia wasn't just a betrayal. She was a reminder of how blind I'd been. Lauren reached across the table, her hand resting on mine. "You weren't blind, Ethan. You trusted someone you loved. That's not a weakness. It's human." Her words stayed with me. Trust had been hard to rebuild. Not just in others, but in myself. But Lauren made it feel possible. The fallout from the trial and Sophia's betrayal lingered in smaller ways. Occasionally, I'd hear about her and Derek from mutual acquaintances, how their appeals were denied, how they were adapting to their lives behind bars. I didn't dwell on it. They were part of my past, not my future. One day, while sorting through old files in my office, I came across a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were photos of my father, Jonathan Brooks, during his time as a ranger. One photo, in particular, caught my attention, him standing with his squad, a determined yet kind expression on his face. I sat down and stared at the photo for a long time, reflecting on the kind of man he was. Sacrificing himself for his men wasn't just an act of bravery. It was a testament to his character. And I realized then that rebuilding my life wasn't just about moving forward. It was about honoring his legacy. Inspired by that thought, I started a new project, a nonprofit organization focused on supporting veterans transitioning back into civilian life. I named it after my father, the Brooks Foundation. Logan was the first person I told about it, and his reaction was everything I'd hoped for. "Your dad would be proud," he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is what it's all about, Ethan. Turning pain into something meaningful." The foundation became a new source of purpose for me. Working with veterans, hearing their stories, and helping them find stability in their post-military lives reminded me of my own struggles and my ability to overcome them. It wasn't just about giving back. It was about building something that mattered. A year after launching the foundation, I stood in front of a packed room at our first fundraiser. Lauren was in the audience, her smile giving me strength as I spoke about my father's legacy and the importance of the work we were doing. The applause at the end of my speech was overwhelming, but it wasn't the sound that stayed with me. It was the sense of connection, of community, of finally being part of something bigger than myself. By the time the second anniversary of the trial came around, my life was unrecognizable from the chaos that had consumed it. The business was thriving, the foundation was making a real impact, and Lauren and I were building something genuine and unshakable. One evening, as we walked along a quiet trail near my home, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about what could have been? If Sophia hadn't betrayed you?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. "I used to," I admitted, "but not anymore. What happened, as painful as it was, brought me here. And here is where I want to be." She smiled, her hand slipping into mine. "Here is pretty good." For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And for that, I was grateful. Life continued to unfold in ways I never expected. With each passing day, the weight of the past grew lighter, replaced by a sense of purpose and peace I hadn't felt in years. The Brooks Foundation became more than a project, it became my calling. Through its work, I met people whose resilience and courage inspired me to push forward, to keep building the life I wanted. Lauren became an integral part of that journey. Her background in nonprofit management turned out to be invaluable, and she threw herself into helping me grow the foundation. Together, we expanded our reach, offering job placement programs, mental health resources, and community support for veterans across the state. One day, as we were reviewing plans for a new initiative, Lauren looked up from her laptop and smiled. "You know, Ethan, this isn't just a foundation anymore. It's a legacy." Her words hit me deeply. For so long, I'd been focused on picking up the pieces of my life, trying to find meaning in the chaos. But she was right, what we were building wasn't just about recovery. It was about creating something enduring, something that would outlast both of us. The third anniversary of the trial came with unexpected news. I received a letter from Sophia. At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to open it. Her name alone stirred emotions I thought I had buried: anger, sadness, betrayal. But curiosity won out, and I unfolded the paper, her familiar handwriting staring back at me. The letter was an apology, at least that's what she called it. She wrote about regret, about how she had been blinded by greed and manipulation. She claimed Derek had coerced her, that she hadn't realized the full extent of his plans until it was too late. But as I read her words, I felt no sympathy. Her actions had nearly destroyed me, and no amount of remorse could erase the choices she had made. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't forgiveness she was asking for, it was absolution. And that wasn't mine to give. What mattered was that I had moved on, that her hold over me was gone. Months later, the foundation celebrated its most significant milestone, yet the opening of a transitional housing facility for homeless veterans. It was a project close to my heart, one that Logan had championed from the beginning. Standing at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by the people whose lives we were working to change, I felt a deep sense of pride. Logan stepped up beside me, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "This is it, Ethan. This is what it's all about." I nodded, emotion threatening to choke me. "We couldn't have done it without you. You're the one who made it happen," he said, his voice full of conviction. "Your dad would be proud." As the years passed, my life with Lauren flourished. We didn't rush anything. We took our time, letting our relationship grow naturally. But one quiet evening, as we sat on the porch of the home we'd built together, I knew it was time. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small box. "Lauren," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "You've been my partner in every way that matters. You've helped me rebuild, helped me believe in myself again. I don't want to face another day without you by my side." Her eyes filled with tears as I opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, throwing her arms around me. Our wedding was a celebration of love, resilience, and new beginnings. Logan stood by my side as my best man, and the room was filled with people who had supported me through the hardest times of my life. It wasn't just a union between Lauren and me. It was a testament to the life we had built together. As I looked into her eyes during our vows, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The pain of the past no longer defined me. It was part of my story, but it wasn't the whole story. This was my new chapter, a life built on trust, love, and purpose. Years later, I found myself sitting on the porch of that same home, now watching as our two children played in the yard. Their laughter filled the air, a sound so pure and joyful it brought a smile to my face. Lauren stepped out, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and sat beside me. "This is what I always dreamed of," she said, her voice soft. "Me too," I replied, taking her hand in mine. "And I'm not letting it go." The years unfolded like chapters in a book, each one filled with growth, challenges, and moments of profound gratitude. The Brooks Foundation continued to thrive, expanding its reach beyond Texas and becoming a national beacon of hope for veterans and their families. Our transitional housing program set the standard for similar initiatives across the country, and the Foundation's job training workshops were helping thousands find new purpose. Logan, now retired, remained an active part of the Foundation's board. He took pride in seeing the legacy of my father, Jonathan Brooks, come to life through the work we were doing. "Your dad would have been honored by this," he often said. He believed in service, not just to his country but to the people around him. His support reminded me of the unshakable bond we'd built over the years. Logan wasn't just a father figure. He was my rock, my guide, and the reason I'd learned to keep moving forward no matter what life threw my way. At home, life with Lauren and our children was everything I dreamed of and more. Our eldest, Oliver, was a curious and adventurous 7-year-old who loved building things, whether it was elaborate Lego structures or forts in the backyard. Our youngest, Amelia, was 5, and her gentle, creative spirit reminded me so much of Lauren. Watching them grow filled me with a joy I hadn't thought possible during the darker years. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over our backyard, Lauren and I sat on the porch swing, watching Oliver and Amelia chase fireflies. "They're amazing, aren't they?" Lauren said, her voice filled with awe. "They are," I replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Every time I look at them, I'm reminded of how far we've come." She turned to me, her expression soft but serious. "You've built something incredible, Ethan. Not just the foundation or the business, but this, our family. It's a legacy in its own right." Her words hit me deeply, and I realized she was right. The legacy I'd once thought was lost, the one tied to my father and the values he'd instilled in me, hadn't just survived. It had grown into something even greater. Despite the peace we'd found, life still had its challenges. Balancing the demands of running a growing nonprofit, managing a construction business, and being present for my family wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt overwhelming, but Lauren was always there to remind me of why it mattered. "You're not just doing this for yourself," she said one night as I vented about a particularly stressful week. "You're doing it for the people who depend on you, for the veterans who need a second chance, for our kids who look up to you, and for the man you've become." Her words kept me going, even on the hardest days. And as the years passed, I learned to embrace the challenges, knowing they were part of a life well lived. By the time Oliver turned 10, he started asking questions about his grandfather, Jonathan Brooks. He'd seen the photos in my office and the plaques commemorating the foundation, but now he wanted to know the stories. "What was Grandpa Jonathan like?" he asked one evening as we sat in the living room. I smiled, pulling him onto my lap. "He was brave," I said. "The kind of brave that means doing the right thing, even when it's hard. He was a leader, someone people trusted. And most of all, he believed in taking care of others." Oliver's eyes widened with curiosity. "Is that why you started the foundation?" "Part of it," I admitted. "I wanted to honor him, to carry on what he stood for. But it's also because of people like Logan, your Grandpa Logan. He taught me what it means to be a good man, a good father." Oliver nodded thoughtfully, and I could see the wheels turning in his young mind. "I want to be like them someday." "You will be," I said, ruffling his hair. "And you'll do it in your own way." As the foundation entered its 10th year, we held a massive gala to celebrate its success. Veterans from all over the country came to share their stories of how the foundation had changed their lives. The event was a reminder of how far we'd come and how much more we could still do. Standing on the stage that night, looking out at a sea of faces, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Lauren stood beside me, her smile radiating pride, and Logan sat in the front row, clapping enthusiastically. "I want to thank each and every one of you," I began, my voice steady but emotional. "This foundation started as a way to honor my father's memory, but it's become so much more. It's a testament to what we can accomplish when we come together, when we choose to lift each other up." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, I truly felt like I'd found my place in the world. Years later, as I sat on the porch of our family home, now surrounded by grandchildren playing in the yard, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the betrayal, the loss. It had all been part of the path that led to this moment. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Lauren joined me, her hair now streaked with silver, but her smile as radiant as ever. "Thinking about the past again?" she asked, her tone teasing. "Always," I admitted, taking her hand. "But mostly, I'm thinking about the future." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "It's a good one, Ethan. A really good one." And for the first time in my life, I didn't just believe it. I knew it to be true. As the years rolled by, life continued to evolve in unexpected and beautiful ways. The Brooks Foundation expanded internationally, opening branches in Europe and Asia to address the growing needs of veterans around the world. Each milestone brought with it a profound sense of accomplishment. Not just for me, but for everyone who had contributed to its success. Lauren and I grew older together, watching as Oliver and Amelia carved out their own paths in life. Oliver inherited my love for building things. He pursued architecture, eventually designing some of the most innovative and environmentally conscious buildings in the state. Amelia, with her compassionate heart, followed in Lauren's footsteps, working in nonprofit management and eventually taking a leadership role in the foundation. The day Amelia officially became the CEO of the Brooks Foundation was one of the proudest moments of my life. Standing beside her at the announcement, I couldn't help but marvel at the woman she had become. Her passion, her drive, her ability to inspire others. It was everything I had hoped to instill in her. "Dad," she said during her speech, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You taught me that leadership isn't about power, it's about service. You built this foundation to honor Grandpa Jonathan's legacy, but in doing so, you created a legacy of your own. I'm honored to carry it forward." Her words brought tears to my eyes, and when she stepped off the stage, I embraced her tightly. "You're going to do amazing things, Amelia," I whispered. I couldn't be prouder. Lauren and I retired to a quiet piece of land just outside Fredericksburg, surrounded by rolling hills and vineyards. The home was modest but perfect, filled with memories of a life well lived. Even in retirement, we stayed busy, volunteering, traveling, and spending time with our growing family. Sunday afternoons became a cherished tradition, with Oliver and Amelia bringing their families over for big meals and endless laughter. One sunny afternoon, as I sat under the shade of an old oak tree, my grandson Eli, a curious and adventurous 6-year-old, ran up to me with a photo in hand. "Grandpa!" he exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. "Who's this?" I looked at the photo, an old snapshot of my father, Jonathan Brooks, in his ranger uniform. Seeing it brought back a flood of memories, but this time, they didn't feel heavy. They felt like a part of me, a part of the legacy I'd worked so hard to honor. "That's your great-grandpa Jonathan," I said, lifting Eli onto my lap. "He was a hero. Like you?" Eli asked, his innocent question catching me off guard. I chuckled softly. "No, not like me. He was braver than I could ever be. But I've tried to live in a way that would make him proud." Eli studied the photo, his small fingers tracing the edges. "I think he'd be really proud, Grandpa." His words struck a chord deep within me. I hugged him tightly, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. As the years turned into decades, the Brooks Foundation became a global force for good. Amelia's leadership brought innovative programs to life, and Oliver's architectural expertise helped design state-of-the-art facilities for veterans in need. The family I had built, the life I had rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, stood as a testament to the power of resilience and love. On my 80th birthday, surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues, I was surprised with a special announcement. Amelia stood at the head of the table holding a plaque. "Dad," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "you've dedicated your life to service, to building something that has changed countless lives. Today, we want to honor you in a way that reflects the incredible impact you've made." She held up the plaque, which read the Ethan Brooks Heart Center for Veteran Empowerment. The room erupted in applause, and I felt tears stream down my face. I looked at Lauren, who smiled warmly, her hand resting on mine. "You deserve this," she whispered. I stood, my voice shaking with emotion. "Thank you," I said, looking around at the faces of the people I loved most. This is more than I could have ever imagined. I've spent my life trying to honor the people who came before me, the sacrifices they made. But what I see here, this family, this foundation, this legacy, it's because of all of you. Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. The applause was deafening, but what mattered most was the love and pride I saw in the eyes of my family. As I reflect on my journey now, sitting on that same porch where so many chapters of my life unfolded, I'm overwhelmed with gratitude. The pain, the betrayal, the loss, they were all part of a greater story, one that led me to a life richer and fuller than I ever thought possible. Lauren joins me, her hand finding mine as we watch our great-grandchildren play in the yard. "We've done well, haven't we?" she says, her voice soft but steady. I nod, a smile spreading across my face. "Better than I ever dreamed." And as the sun sets on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, I know one thing for certain: the best legacies aren't built on perfection. They're built on love, resilience, and the courage to keep moving forward. Years later, as I neared my 90th birthday, life felt like a well-worn book, each page filled with stories, lessons, and the people who mattered most. Lauren and I had slowed down considerably, but the warmth of our family and the success of the Brooks Foundation kept our days full of meaning. One crisp autumn morning, I found myself sitting at my desk, sifting through old letters, photos, and documents that told the story of my life. There was a stack of letters from veterans who had been helped by the foundation, thank yous, updates on their lives, and even photos of their families. It struck me just how far-reaching the impact had been. What had started as a tribute to my father had grown into a movement that spanned continents, touching lives in ways I never could have imagined. Amelia came by that afternoon, bringing her teenage daughter, Grace, who had recently shown an interest in the foundation's work. Grace was sharp, curious, and full of questions, reminding me of her mother at that age. "Grandpa," Grace asked as she flipped through an old album, "did you ever think the foundation would get this big?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "No, Grace. When I started it, I just wanted to help a few veterans find their footing. I never imagined it would grow like this." She looked at me with wide eyes. "I think it's amazing. I want to be part of it someday." "You will be," I said with a smile, "and you'll bring your own vision to it. That's how legacies grow. They evolve with the people who carry them forward." Her words filled me with a quiet pride. Seeing the next generation step forward, ready to take the torch, reassured me that the work we had started would continue long after I was gone. As my birthday approached, the family began planning a celebration. It was meant to be a small gathering, but as word spread, colleagues, friends, and supporters from across the years wanted to be part of the milestone. The day arrived, and the house buzzed with energy as loved ones filled every corner. Oliver gave a heartfelt toast, speaking about the lessons he'd learned from me over the years. "Dad taught us that life isn't about avoiding hardships. It's about facing them head-on and finding a way to build something meaningful from the rubble. He's been my role model, my mentor, and my greatest inspiration." Amelia followed, her voice steady but emotional. "Dad's strength lies in his ability to turn pain into purpose. The Brooks Foundation wouldn't exist without his vision and his resilience. Today, we honor not just his birthday, but the countless lives he's touched through his work and his love." As they raised their glasses, I found myself overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and gratitude. I stood, my knees not as steady as they once were, but my voice still strong. "Thank you," I began, pausing to take in the room. "Thank you for making this life everything I could have dreamed of and more. It's not just about the work we've done. It's about the people we've done it for and with. Every one of you has been a part of this journey, and I'm forever grateful." In the years that followed, the Brooks Foundation continued to thrive under Amelia's leadership, with Grace becoming more involved as she grew older. Lauren and I spent our days surrounded by family, our home filled with laughter and the steady hum of life. Every visit, every conversation with my children and grandchildren reminded me of the resilience that had carried us all this way. One peaceful evening, as Lauren and I sat together watching the sunset, she leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked. "Every day," I replied, squeezing her hand. "And I wouldn't change a thing." Her voice softened. "Do you think Jonathan would be proud?" I smiled, feeling the familiar warmth of his memory. "I think he'd be proud of all of us." Eventually, life slowed even more, as it does for everyone. But it wasn't a sad transition. It was a reflective one, filled with gratitude for the time I had been given and the people who had shared it with me. One evening, as the house grew quiet and the last light of day faded into the horizon, I found myself writing a letter. It was addressed to my grandchildren, a way of sharing the lessons I had learned over a lifetime. I wrote about love, resilience, and the importance of building a life filled with purpose. I wrote about my father, Jonathan, and how his sacrifice had shaped the man I became. I wrote about Logan, whose unwavering support had carried me through the darkest moments. And I wrote about Lauren, the love of my life, whose strength and kindness had made everything possible. When the letter was finished, I sealed it and placed it in a drawer, knowing it would one day find its way to them. It wasn't just a letter. It was a reminder that even in the face of pain and loss, life could be beautiful. And so, as my journey reached its final chapters, I found peace in the legacy I had built and the family who would carry it forward. The sun continued to rise and set, painting the sky with colors that reminded me of the possibilities each day could bring. My story was one of pain, resilience, and love. But most importantly, it was a story of hope, and that was a story worth telling. As the years dwindled, I felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. My life had been a journey of immense trials and triumphs, of learning how to rebuild when everything seemed lost. And as the days grew quieter, I knew my time was nearing its end. One crisp morning, I sat on the porch with Lauren, now frilier but just as beautiful as the day I met her. Her hand rested in mine, our wedding rings glinting softly in the sunlight. She turned to me, her smile gentle. "You've given us a good life, Ethan," she said. Her voice was soft but unwavering, filled with the warmth of decades of love and partnership. "We've done it together," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "I wouldn't have made it this far without you." Her eyes glistened, and for a moment, we sat in silence, watching the leaves rustle in the wind. It was a peace I hadn't thought possible in the years when betrayal and loss had consumed me. But now, with Lauren by my side, surrounded by the family we'd built, I felt whole. One evening, not long after, my children and grandchildren gathered at the house for dinner. The air buzzed with laughter and conversation, the warmth of family filling every corner. Oliver regaled us with stories about his latest architectural project, while Amelia talked about the foundation's newest initiative. Grace chimed in, excitedly discussing her plans to expand the foundation's outreach programs internationally. I watched them, my heart swelling with pride. These were the people I had fought for, built for, and loved more than anything. They were my legacy. After dinner, as the family lingered in the living room, Grace approached me. "Grandpa, there's something I want to show you," she said, handing me a folder. Inside were detailed plans for a new branch of the foundation, a state-of-the-art center for veteran rehabilitation and training. She had named it the Ethan Brooks Heart Institute. I looked up at her, overwhelmed. "Grace, this is incredible. It's the least we can do," she said, smiling. "You started all of this, Grandpa. This is our way of continuing what you built." Tears filled my eyes as I hugged her tightly. "Thank you," I whispered. "This means more than I can say." That night, as the family trickled out and the house grew quiet again, Lauren and I sat together by the fire. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I felt the steady rhythm of her breathing, a comforting reminder of the life we had shared. "I think I'm ready," I said softly, breaking the silence. She lifted her head, her eyes meeting mine. She didn't need to ask what I meant. She knew. "You've done everything you set out to do, Ethan. And more." I smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. "I couldn't have done it without you." A few days later, I passed away quietly in my sleep, with Lauren by my side. It was peaceful, just as I had always hoped it would be. My family came together to honor my life, not with sadness but with gratitude for the time we had shared. At the memorial, Amelia gave a speech that captured everything I had hoped to leave behind. "My father taught us that life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about learning to rise from it," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "He turned his greatest losses into his greatest legacies, and he taught us to do the same. He wasn't just a father or a grandfather. He was a builder of homes, of hope, and of love, and his story will live on in all of us." In the years that followed, the Brooks Foundation flourished under the leadership of my children and grandchildren. The institute bearing my name became a beacon of hope for veterans around the world. My family continued to gather every Sunday, their laughter filling the home I had once thought would never feel whole again. And though I was gone, my presence remained in the love they shared, in the work they carried forward, and in the legacy we had built together. My story had come to an end, but theirs was just beginning. A story of resilience, love, and the power of building something that lasts.